Wait, isn't that your poor ex-wife? I thought she was barren. How did she have triplets? You know, sometimes life has a funny way of coming full circle. Sometimes the person who breaks you becomes the very reason you discover just how strong you really are. My name is Sophia, and this is the story of how I went from being the woman who gave everything to a man who gave me nothing to becoming the woman who walked into his wedding with triplets on my hip and dignity in my heart. The beginning and the red flags. I was 23 when I married Marco. 23 and so full of hope it practically radiated from my skin. I believed in the fairy tale, you know. I believed that love conquered all. That a good woman could love a man into being better. That marriage was this sacred thing where two people built something beautiful together. Marco was handsome in that way that makes your girlfriends jealous and your mama nervous. 6 feet 2 inches, smooth, dark skin, a smile that could charm the paint off walls, and a way with words that made you feel like you were the only woman in the world. When he proposed to me outside that little cathedral in Miami where we first met, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. The first red flag should have been his son, Leo. Not Leo himself. That baby was innocent in all of this. But the way Marco talked about Leo's mother, Isabella. She was just a mistake, he'd say whenever I brought up the fact that they still talked regularly. You're my wife now, baby. You're my future. I swallowed those words like medicine. The second red flag was how he treated me when we couldn't get pregnant right away. Month after month, nothing. And Marco made sure I knew whose fault he thought it was. My boy's strong, he'd say, gesturing toward Leo's pictures on our mantle. I already got proof I can make babies, so what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Those 4 words became the soundtrack to my marriage. I went to the doctor alone, month after month, test after test. I let them poke me and prod me and examine every inch of my reproductive system. And you know what? All those tests showed that I was perfectly, completely, 100% fertile and healthy. There was absolutely nothing wrong with me. But Marco didn't want to hear that. That's good, baby, he mumbled, barely looking up from his phone. But there ain't no issue with me, he cut me off, finally looking up with eyes that had gone cold. I got proof walking around calling me daddy. Don't start with that nonsense. The betrayal and the theft. 6 years. 6 years of taking his anger and his blame and his cruelty. 6 years of watching him text his ex-girlfriend. 6 years of giving him everything, my love, my loyalty, my self-respect, and eventually my money. I had been saving money, $12,000, from my job at the boutique. It was going to be our nest egg. Marco found out about that money and saw not a future, but an opportunity. I got an opportunity, Sophia. A real opportunity. My boy Nico, he's opening up a second location for his tailoring business. He needs a partner. He made promises of a life together, of finally focusing on starting our family. And I was so desperate for that feeling that I ignored every red flag. That night, I gave him everything. I emptied my savings account and handed him every penny. The tailoring business did take off. Within 6 months, Marco was making more money than he'd ever made in his life. But success didn't make him treat me any better. It made him worse. The end came on a Thursday. I came home early from work and heard voices coming from inside our house. Marco's voice and Isabella's. I stood frozen, listening to them talk about their plans like I didn't exist. She's so pathetic, Isabella was saying. Man, I can't keep doing this much longer, Marco replied. I'm making good money now. I don't need her anymore. He gave me $12,000 to get the business started. Cleaned out her whole savings account, Marco laughed. Took it and ran with it. That woman's so desperate for me to love her. She'd probably give me her kidneys if I asked nice enough. Starting from zero in Chicago. 3 days later, he asked for a divorce. He came home and tossed the papers on the kitchen table. Divorce papers. I want out, Sophia. This isn't working. What about the business? The money I gave you? That was a gift, he said finally. You can't take back a gift. Within a month, Isabella and Leo were moving into our house. Within 3 months, I was driving away from the life I had built. I had nothing. No money, no house, no husband, no children. At 29 years old, I was starting over from absolute zero. And the only place I had to go was back home to Chicago to live with my mama. My mama, Clara, was sick with diabetes and high blood pressure. She had owned a small bakery once, years ago. The place had been closed for 2 years when I moved back home. Don't you dare blame yourself for loving someone, Mama said firmly. That's not a weakness, Sophia. That's a strength. Don't let him take that away from you. Rebuilding with Elias. It was during one of those dark days that I first noticed Elias. He was tall and lean with kind eyes and a camera hanging around his neck. He was documenting the revitalization efforts in our neighborhood. Mama liked him immediately. I mostly hid, but Elias was persistent in the gentlest way possible. He just sat, not talking, not pushing, just being there. It took me 3 months to tell him what had happened. When I finally told him about Marco, I expected pity. Instead, Elias got angry. That man is a fool, and someday he's going to realize what he gave up. Slowly, carefully, I started to rebuild. I started going to therapy. And I started looking at that old bakery with new eyes. I started researching food trucks and meal prep services. The idea was simple, healthy, affordable meals for busy people. I got a job at a nearby grocery store and worked double shifts. Let me help you, Elias said one evening. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking to be part of something meaningful. I believe in you. He started filming everything. It took 2 years to save enough money to start renovating the bakery. I learned to tile and paint and install fixtures. I called it Sustenance, in honor of Mama. Success and the Miracle. Sustenance opened on a Tuesday in March, 2.5 years after I had come back to Chicago with nothing. By noon, we had a line out the door. People loved what we were offering. By the end of our second year, Sustenance was thriving. More importantly, I was thriving, too. The broken woman who had left Miami was gone, replaced by someone stronger. That's when I finally said yes to Elias. I have a confession, Elias said over dessert on our first date. I've been in love with you for 2 years. I know, I said. And I think I'm ready to love you back. We got married at the courthouse on a Thursday. It was perfect because it was real. 3 months after our wedding, 2 incredible things happened. First, Elias convinced me to let him post some of the videos he had been taking for the business. They went viral. We went from serving a few hundred people a week to shipping products nationwide. The second incredible thing happened 2 weeks later. I was working late one night when the nausea hit. I took 3 pregnancy tests. All positive. At 8 weeks, the ultrasound showed not 1 heartbeat, but 3. Triplets. 3 healthy growing babies who decided to come into the world together. I thought about Marco in that moment, about all the times he had blamed me. The irony wasn't lost on me. With the right partner, a man who truly loved and supported me, my body had not only gotten pregnant but had created 3 lives at once. We had daughters. Zoe, Zara, and Zuri. 3 perfect little miracles. The full circle. For the next 2 years, we lived quietly but abundantly. Sustenance continued to thrive. We bought a beautiful house. We kept our personal lives private. As far as the world knew, Sustenance was a successful brand built by a woman who valued her privacy. I had deleted everything from my old life. I thought about Marco sometimes, but those thoughts didn't hurt anymore. They were just curiosities. As far as he knew, I had disappeared into thin air. And that was exactly how I wanted it until that Sunday phone call changed everything. We were having our weekly family dinner. That's when Mama's phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made her pick up. I watched her face change as she listened. Her eyes found mine across the room, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. Her eyes found mine across the room, and I saw something that made my stomach drop, a mixture of confusion, shock, and a strange, almost nervous triumph. "Hello," Mama Clara said again, her voice a little too loud, her eyes still locked on mine. "Yes, I'm her mother." "Who is this?" She listened for a long moment, nodding slowly. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. Elias noticed the tension and scooped up Zoe and Zara, carrying them to the far end of the living room to distract them. Zoe toddled after them. She's very busy, sir," Mama finally said, her voice dropping. "It's been a long time. I don't know why you would be calling after all this time." Another pause. "No, she can't just call you back about this. What exactly is this?" She listened intently, and this time, the confusion on her face solidified into absolute fury. Her grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles were white. "You listen to me, Marco," she spat, using his name for the first time. "My daughter is happy, healthy, and thriving, and she does not need your mess in her life. You made your choices. You took her money, you cheated on her, and you blamed her for your own shortcomings. You called her barren. You have absolutely no right to call this number." She slammed the phone down, her chest heaving. The entire room was silent. "Mama, who was that?" I asked, though I already knew. "That was him, baby. Marco," she said, her voice shaking with righteous anger. "He's getting married again. To that Isabella woman, finally. And he was calling because he's in trouble." I stared at her. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" "The tailoring business," Mama explained, rubbing her temple. "Turns out, his partner, Nico, wasn't as loyal as he thought. When Marco went to cash out and use the funds for the wedding, the account was nearly empty. Nico took everything and closed the second location. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. Marco, the man who had stolen my $12,000 to start his business, was now being robbed himself. But that's not why he called me," Mama continued, her eyes softening as she looked at me. "He called because of the videos." "The videos?" "He saw the videos for sustenance. He recognized my kitchen, my voice, and your hands. He figured out that the successful entrepreneur who was taking the market by storm with healthy food was you. He said he knows you have money now. He was calling to beg you for a loan to save his business and pay for the wedding. He said you owed him for getting his start with your help." I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of a woman who had finally been granted the last word after years of silent abuse. "No, I don't owe him anything," I said, a wave of calmness washing over me. "But I do think it's time he sees the woman he left behind." The invitation. Elias walked over and put his arm around me. "What are you thinking, my love?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. "I'm thinking it's time to set the record straight," I replied. "He told me I was broken, worthless, and could never give him a family. He made me feel small so he could feel big. Now, he's at his lowest, and I'm at my highest. You're not going to help him, are you?" Mama asked. "No, Mama. But I'm going to finish the story," I said, a mischievous idea forming in my mind. "When he left, he didn't even have the decency to talk to me. He just tossed papers on a table. He gets married in a month, right? I want to deliver a gift." I spent the next week getting the details. It turns out, Marco and Isabella were having a large, expensive wedding at a luxury resort on the outskirts of Miami. Marco had apparently taken out some high-interest loans to make the wedding happen, hoping to cover them with the business money. Now, he was desperate. I called a close friend who still lived in Miami, Talia, and explained what I wanted to do. Talia, who had watched me suffer through Marco's cruelty, was all in. A few days before the wedding, I had Talia send 2 packages to Marco's apartment. The first was a small box containing a perfectly wrapped, beautifully bound copy of the divorce papers he had thrown on my table 6 years ago, with a simple note from me, gift returned. The second was a large, elegant invitation. It was a formal invitation to the grand opening of the new sustenance flagship location, printed on thick linen paper. The date of the opening was 1 week after his wedding. The invitation also included a full-color, glossy photo of Elias and me smiling, with our 3 beautiful daughters, Zoe, Zara, and Zuri, sitting in front of a giant logo of sustenance. The caption beneath the photo simply read, "The Johnson family." I knew that seeing that photo, seeing my perfect family, the 3 thriving daughters, the successful business, would hit him harder than any confrontation. The entrance. The day of the wedding was a perfect, sun-drenched Saturday. We flew to Miami and stayed in a hotel far away from the resort. My friend Talia met me there and helped me get ready. I wore a tailored, emerald green dress, a powerful color that Marco always hated because he said it didn't match his taste. My hair was styled, and my makeup was flawless. I felt unstoppable. We arrived at the resort just as the reception was beginning. The room was opulent, filled with hundreds of people. Talia went in first to scout the table where Marco and Isabella were sitting. Marco and Isabella are at the main table, looking like stressed-out statues, Talia whispered back to me. He looks awful, like he hasn't slept in weeks. Now is the time. I took a deep breath. Elias held the hands of Zara and Zuri, who were dressed in matching white dresses. I carried Zoe on my hip, her little hands clutching the collar of my dress. We walked into the crowded ballroom, not in a rush, but with an air of absolute authority. Every head turned. I didn't try to hide. I walked straight toward the head table. I felt every eye in the room on me, especially Marco's. He was holding a champagne glass, but his hand froze halfway to his mouth. His jaw literally dropped. Isabella looked first confused, then horrified, recognizing the woman her fiancé had been desperately trying to avoid. I stopped just a few feet from their table. My gaze locked with Marco's. His eyes, once so cold and dismissive, were wide with a mix of shock and utter defeat. He looked at me, successful, stunning, confident. Then he looked at Elias, a man who clearly cherished me. And then, he saw the girls. 3 little faces. Identical in their perfect, 2-year-old innocence. Marco's face went pale. He finally lowered the glass, setting it down with a slight tremble. He scanned the room, looking at the crowd, then back at me. He looked at the triplets, then back at my perfectly flat stomach, then back at the children who were living, breathing proof that he was wrong. It was Isabella who finally broke the silence. She leaned over to him and hissed, loud enough for a few surrounding tables to hear. "Wait, isn't that your poor ex-wife? I thought she was barren. How did she have triplets?" Marco didn't answer. He just stared. I smiled, a small, genuine smile that held no malice, only satisfaction. I looked at Marco, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who broke me. I saw a small, pathetic fool who had thrown away a queen. "Marco," I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing across the sudden silence of the ballroom. "I just came to return the favor. Enjoy the wedding." I didn't wait for a reply. I simply turned and walked away, my husband, my mama, and my 3 perfect daughters following me. With every step, I felt the weight of 6 years of pain lift off my shoulders. I left him in the silence, with nothing but the truth, a new wife, and a ruined wedding reception. I didn't need revenge. I had a life. The exit and the aftermath. I continued my walk of dignity toward the massive arched doorway. The silence I had created wasn't lasting, though. As I reached the edge of the room, the sounds of shock and confusion swelled behind me. A few scattered gasps turned into a chorus of murmuring, and then someone started yelling. It wasn't Marco. He was still frozen, his defeat so complete he was incapable of movement. It was Isabella. Marco. What are you doing? Do something. Marco. Her voice was shrill, laced with panic. Explain this. What is this woman doing here? Who are these children? We paused just outside the room, standing under the protective shade of the resort's portico. We didn't need to be inside to hear the chaos we'd unleashed. It's over, baby, Elias whispered, squeezing my hand gently. You did it. You showed him. Mama Clara, who had discreetly followed us out, was beaming. That was the finest exit I have ever witnessed, she declared. Now, let's go. I think our driver is here. As we walked briskly toward the waiting car, the door to the ballroom burst open. Not Marco, but Nico, his former business partner, now a bewildered guest at the reception, stood gaping at us. He was clearly trying to process the triple shock of seeing me, seeing Elias, and seeing the triplets. Marco's voice finally erupted from inside the room, fueled by a final, desperate burst of ego. Get her out of here. Get that woman and those mistakes out of my sight. I didn't flinch. I just walked faster. Going home. We settled into the large, black SUV. The girls, oblivious to the emotional drama they'd just been a part of, were chattering happily about the sparkly room and their pretty dresses. I fastened them securely into their car seats, feeling a profound sense of calm. As we pulled away from the resort, I looked back once. I saw a small crowd of people huddled near the entrance, looking bewildered. I imagined the scene I'd left behind, a ruined toast, a panicked bride, a defeated groom, and hundreds of gossiping guests with the story of a lifetime. Marco's life wasn't just collapsing due to his business failure, it was being publicly ridiculed on the happiest day he thought he could steal for himself. His desperate call for a loan, his attempt to contact his barren ex-wife, and the resulting humiliation would become the stuff of legend within his social circle. Are you okay, my love? Elias asked, reaching for my hand across the console. I turned to him, my gaze clear. I am more than okay, Elias. He had spent years telling me I was the problem. I was the barren one, the useless one, the one who wasn't enough to make a family. Today, he saw three of the strongest pieces of proof that he was, and has always been, the one with the problem. Not just biologically, but in his character. I looked at the back seats, where my three perfect, thriving daughters were already starting to fall asleep. My life isn't about him anymore, I stated, the finality of the words settling deep in my soul. It's about them. And it's about us. The only reason I went was to close the book so completely there would never be another chapter. Forever starts now. That was the last time I ever saw Marco. The next day, we flew back to Chicago. The wedding, according to Talia, devolved into a shouting match that ended before the expensive dinner was even served. Isabella left the venue with her parents, and the marriage was over before it began. Marco was left alone with his mounting debts and the knowledge that the woman he had discarded was not only wealthier and happier than him, but had also achieved the very thing he'd mocked her for lacking, a family. We never heard from him again. He was gone, absorbed back into the obscurity he deserved. My family, however, grew richer, not just in wealth but in love. Sustenance continued to thrive, our Chicago flagship location becoming a community hub. We expanded the business, never forgetting the core values of nourishment and accessible health that Mama Clara and I started with. But the true fortune was at home. Every evening, I was surrounded by my husband, Elias, my rock and true partner, and my three incredible daughters, Zoe, Zara, and Zuri. They were my living, laughing proof that the pain of the past was simply the fuel for the extraordinary joy of the present. I had walked into that reception with triplets on my hip and dignity in my heart. But I walked out with something far more valuable, absolute peace. The woman who had given everything to a man who gave her nothing had taken back everything and built an empire of happiness and strength. And the best part? She did it on her own terms.